Welcome. I'm Terry Kramer, Faculty Director of the Easton Technology Management Center here at UCLA Anderson. And I wanted to welcome you to the special program on the transformative effect of biopharma innovation on the future of healthcare. And we've got three great speakers here to share a lot of unique insights on this timely topic. Now, today's transformational COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics have highlighted an important trend in healthcare, the notable innovation occurring in biopharma, including new modalities like RNA therapeutics, gene therapy, digital health solutions, and personalized healthcare. These innovations offer the potential for enhanced health outcomes with the potential for improved affordability and improved access. Today, we'll have a fascinating discussion for you highlighting the key areas of innovation today and tomorrow, and a deeper discussion of the key enablers for these innovations in pharmaceuticals, including the role of technology, the role of data and patient behavior, the role of changing business models, public policy, and the availability of venture capital. But first, just a bit of context. First of all, thanks to the consistent innovation in biopharmaceutical industry overall, many diseases that were once considered incurable are now treatable, increasing the life expectancy and quality of life for many patients. According to a study published in Health Affairs, life expectancy in the US increased 3.3 years between 1990 and 2015, and pharmaceuticals are responsible for 35% of improved life expectancy. Biopharmaceutical innovation accounted for 76% of improvements in mortality for patients overall in HIV/AIDS, 60% of improvement in mortality for patients with breast cancer, and 52% of improvements in mortality for patients with heart disease. In addition, the promise of biopharma innovation has in transforming retail pharmacies from mere transaction points to a robust point of interaction is amazing. According to McKesson, the pharmacy of the future will focus on personalized patient care, where patients will be able to assess personalized clinical services like adherence counseling, adjacent therapies, health education, pharmacogenetic testing, etc. However, pharmaceutical costs in the US continue to rise steadily, burdening consumers with high out-of-pocket costs. According to a paper in the American Journal of Health System Pharmacy, in 2019, the US spent a total of over $507 billion in pharmaceutical expenditures, growing more than 5% from 2018. This was driven by increased prices, utilization, and new drugs. Additionally, a report published by the Ways and Means Committee of the US Congress found that Americans pay on average nearly 4 times more for drugs than 11 other comparable developed countries, including the UK, Japan, Germany, and France. Lowering the costs of pharmaceuticals is a top priority. Now, to discuss all of these areas of innovation and their transformative impact on healthcare, we've got a great group of panelists with us today. First of all, we've got Mark Noguchi, class of '81. He's a senior vice president and head of business development for Chugai Pharmaceutical Company, a leading innovation-based pharma company committed to delivering novel drugs and services. There, he leads a team responsible for establishing and maintaining global partnerships for the discovery, development, and commercialization of medicines. Second, we've got Stella Xu. She's the managing director of Quan Capital, a life science venture fund with deep expertise and broad experiences in cross-border value creation and global investments. And finally, we've got Gregg Talbert. Gregg is the global head of digital and personalized healthcare partnering at Roche, where he leads a team responsible for the identification and execution of digital healthcare partnerships as part of the implementation of Roche's personalized healthcare strategy. Now, for today's session, I'm going to lead a set of questions that gets a chance to understand these issues better and gives us a chance to understand the points of view of our panelists. And then we'll go to a moderated Q&A. We'll use Slido for that moderated Q&A. So you can go to Slido, SLIDO.com, enter in the event code Biopharma, one word Biopharma, and you can either enter in your own question or upvote your an existing question. I'll attempt to have the most popular questions posed to our panelists. So let me first start out again, Mark, Stella, and Greg, a big welcome to each of you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Terry.
Thank you. It's great to be
Good.
here.
And let me start out with each of you and ask you about your view about the most promising area of innovation that you see across all areas: RNA therapeutics, gene therapy, personalized healthcare, et cetera. Mark, let's start with you.
Well, the advancement in sciences continues to be amazing. The advancement in technology continues to be amazing. And as the evolution continues, we see gene therapies, cell therapies, new approaches based on insights, biological insights. Who would have thought that we could take genes and edit them, fix them, replace them, and come up with new approaches for disease treatment for specific individuals? And what this also requires, though, is insight from a technology standpoint about the biology, the patients, the data, and it's this combination of advancing information technology with advancing biological scientific technologies that allows us to develop meaningful new medicines for each individual rather than a one-size-fits-all approach.
Excellent. Very, very helpful. Stella, let me go over to you. I mean, you get a chance, I assume, as an investor, seeing lots of interesting innovations. What do you see that's most interesting?
And that's why it's difficult to put it in one sentence. But if we have to, I would agree with Mark. It's really the convergence of all different types of technology innovation and transform them into products or difference in therapy approach. So I think there are so many different types of innovation in biopharmaceutical, starting from a deeper or better understanding of the disease biology. What's actually the driver for disease? What mutation, what targets were the best? And then the next level is modality. Once you identify the new target, you can use small molecule, you can use protein, you can use gene therapy, cell therapy, or a combination of all of those to attack the target. And the other way is a convergence, a diagnostic. You have to actually pair or match the best patients with the best therapy, and then actually disease management going forward. So that's why I think all the different technologies are hopefully work in convergence and synergize with each other so that we can personalize the best therapy for the best patients, but at a reasonable cost.
Excellent. Also very helpful. And Greg, tell us about your area of focus, because I think you spend a lot of time on personalized healthcare and digital health. Tell us what you're seeing in your domain.
Thanks, happy to. And sorry to be non-controversial here. I'm going to have to just build on the themes of Mark and Stella, because I do believe that it's not digital alone or new modalities alone that are going to carry the day for patients and for drug discovery and development long term. It is combining them both. You know, back in 2015, when we at Roche began working with Foundation Medicine, of course, a leading oncology next-gen sequencing firm, there was always this question about how do you ramp up the use of next-generation sequencing in oncology, and what could Roche do to help facilitate that? And at the end of the day, it was discover new medicines that take advantage of the power in that information, that help you treat patients that are segmented by that information. And the better treatments that you have to build off of that information and personalized care, the more that technology will be used. And I think it's the same thing, and we're beginning to see that now, where we have many modalities that can treat patients in many different ways. And when we combine that with digital tools, data and information, and then the analytics to identify the patients that will benefit most from those particular modalities, that's when we really see the power of technology and biotechnology together in service of patients.
Yeah, great. Let me try and understand the role of technology itself here. I mean, we obviously at UCLA cover a variety of technology. We talk about data, we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about the Internet of Things, we talk about cloud computing. When you look at the role of technology here, what are the primary drivers here? Is it a lot of it, 80, 90% boils down to data and the ability to analyze it? Is that kind of the summary here? Gregg, let's start with you.
Yeah. I think that when we look at technology in biopharma, we really look at three buckets, right? And we start with data. We also have advanced analytics. So think, AI, machine learning, deep learning, and then digital, which is a very broad category that in some regards takes advantage of the first two. It can be everything from a wearable to a handheld device to a platform that links patients and healthcare providers. As we look at those three areas, it all starts with the data, because if you don't have the right data to answer or to address a particular use case or draw a particular insight, then the analytical tools are just not going to be right. So you have to always look at what's the question I'm trying to answer, what's the data that I have, and the quality of that data to bring to bear against that. And then based on those, what are the analytical tools that I have? And then you can create, these feedback loops by having data sources that continue on a longitudinal basis to deliver back into research and development to facilitate discovery of new medicines based on what we learn from the data in real practice.
Yeah, and Gregg, let me just follow up on one other thing here. So one of the questions when you mentioned data is so important, why now? So when we look at other areas, you say, well, there's an explosion of data because of e-commerce, because of social networks, because of wearable devices. Where is the kind of data explosion here that's powering all of this?
Yeah, I'd say it started in biopharma in life sciences with the adoption of electronic health records. As soon as we started to digitize clinical information about patients, I mean, we've always had data in the form of data from clinical trials, which is clean and focused and provides, I think a good resource for analytics. But as you look at, increasing the span of your insights, having real world data is very important. So when we had EHRs adopted, back in the Obama administration in a big way, that helped facilitate it. And that was happening in conjunction with, I mentioned next generation sequencing. I think in oncology, at least, it happened in conjunction with the ability to sequence genomes for much lower cost. And so that also being another form or modality of data. And now we're looking at expanding that into data that is born out of images, all different types of imaging data as an example, and bringing, as we look at not just care, but what's the best care and most efficient way to care for patients long term, then you look at data that has to do with payers and outcomes. And so, but it all began with I think the adoption of EHRs and then the price reduction in the ability to sequence genomes.
Excellent. Stella, let me go to you. Similar question about the role of technology here, and is it data? And you talked about convergence of technologies. Say more from your standpoint about why now and what the role of technology's been here.
Well, I think there are so many different types of technologies. I think Gregg started to talk about data, but if you think about in the process of drug discovery and development, there's many more technologies to actually discover, manufacture the drug itself, as well as package them in the right formulation and deliver them to the right target. And that target is living in a living, constantly changing environment of patient, and each patient is different. So there's so many technologies we can think about. So, and actually from data, if you think about the first booming in biotech, earlier one was the genomic booming when first human sequence was done, everybody thought, oh, great, we're in a la-la land now. We can actually, according to the gene sequence, just come up with new drugs with all these new targets. Turns out that things are much more complicated because we're dealing with the human bodies, which the biology itself is very poorly understood. And you don't know what sequence will translate into protein function, conformation, modification, and you don't know when you intervene with that protein or that gene sequence with small molecule, large molecule, how that will trigger a whole cascade of response. So the technologies in biotech or pharma minds means many things. In addition to the typical IT type of a data type of technologies, there's how do you generate the compounds, how do you deliver the compounds, and actually how do you run the preclinical studies in cells or in animal models versus clinical development in patients in a more efficient way. So you actually validate this drug is right for this target with this treatment regimen. So actually, it's a very broad sense of technologies, and each one of them needs to catch up with each other for it to work. So like gene therapy, the concept has been there for a long time since people know about DNA. But a lot of safety issues, a lot of drug delivery issues. Even today, you hear the latest was bluebirds. There's a promising drug. Some of them has already been marketed. And then they suddenly found out that patients, after a few years of usage, they actually had cancer. So is that or is that not related with the therapy? So there's a lot of unanswered questions, and all the different types of technologies have to all catch up in order to make a new therapy successful, safe, and effective, and reasonable cost.
Great. Very helpful. Mark, your thought on this?
Yeah, I think Gregg touched a lot on the clinical data, the human clinical data aspect. Stella moved into the research aspects, and to go there a little bit further. In general, the biopharm industry identifies a biological target to address and tries to come up with a medicine to address that target. And that's what the industry has always done in trying to deliver new medicines for patients. And what something like computational biology or computational chemistry allows is bringing in lots of data, lots of human genome data, lots of data on the various targets or mechanisms in the human body, use some mathematical modeling, some simulations, some artificial intelligence to work with that large amount of data in ways that we could not do before, and therefore be very specific in identifying those pathways, those targets in the human body, such that we then can apply other approaches to come up with ways to treat those diseases. So computational biology, along with the other aspects that Gregg and Stella mentioned, are leading us to some important new medicines.
You know what's interesting about listening to the three of you is this discussion of data and the use of data and creating these disproportionate, almost sounds like a discussion we have in other technology related areas. It could be the discussion of autonomous vehicles and looking at the speed of a car and cross traffic and computing and predicting. It could be with e-commerce, understanding the individual, what they buy, their price sensitivity against supply. And it's all of this relationship to data. Is that a fair kind of summary? And if it is a fair summary, who came up with data first? The pharmaceutical industry, you could say, Kramer, we've been doing this for a long time, and all these other guys just came into it. Or would you say, no, these tech companies have really kind of mastered data, and now it's finding its way into pharmaceuticals? How do you look at all of this? Gregg, let me start with you.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So I would say the analogy is fair, but it only goes so far, because one of the differences I would say between at least the two industries that you've shared, and biopharma, for instance, is the as we call the cleanliness of the data, right? So I would say that actually the biopharma industry has been using data for as long, if not longer, right, than some of those other industries. However, it's been using data in this very clearly defined pathway for clinical trials in a very limited fashion. I think the other industries, many other industries, have surpassed the utility of the data that they have, surpassed pharma in the utility of the data that they have, because they have very structured and clean data to work with. And I would say also much simpler mathematical rules that they have to deal with as well. When you get into the biological sciences, and then I would also say probably easier regulations to deal with. When you get into the biological science, to achieve what they've begun to achieve with AI, there's quite a bit of work that you need to do to take a very fragmented set of data from different healthcare providers, different institutions around the globe, try to synchronize that in a way and bring it together. You have to take much of the information in these health records is unstructured. You have to figure out ways to structure that data, because if you don't have that data in a structured format, you can't analyze it with AI techniques. And unfortunately, at this point, AI itself, or natural language processing, is not good enough to do that in an automated fashion for health records. And you have to do all this while ensuring that you maintain data privacy, the privacy of the patient, which is, paramount in our industry, and adhering to privacy rules that differ in some cases quite dramatically across the globe. And so while the industry may have been early to the data party, if you will, and using data, I think others are extracting more from it today. But we're wrestling with these data issues to catch up in that regard.
Yep. Good. Mark or Stella, any add-ons to that?
Go ahead, Stella.
Thank you. I'm just thinking for healthcare, as Gregg started to mention, it's so fragmented because you have so many different types of data. A lot of them are in the research and development stage are with big pharma, and then a lot of them are with doctor or hospital, and a lot of them with patient individually. And then a lot from investors' perspective, some of the AI startup, for example, they say, we have the best algorithm. We can help you to, the black box magic that can help you to identify target best, or knowing that what clinical trial design would be best. But the thing is, for AI to really work, you have to have a large amount of high quality data that will help to validate and optimize your algorithm. And who has those data? So it's actually not with the small AI startup or the technology players necessarily, because they're either with big pharma or with hospital, with patients, with physicians. So then with all the regulations that Gregg talked about, HIPAA and all the privacy, and obviously with companies, you have IP and all those. Who owns the data? Who will give you the data to test and validate your algorithm before you know whether your algorithm works or not? The other challenge is also for AI, they claim, if they tell me, our algorithm will help you to select better target or select better compound. And I was like, how long will it take for me to know that actually it's your algorithm that's making the difference? Because typically clinical proof of concept takes years and years and years. So end of the day, so I think that's where for the data convergence or integration, we talk about translational medicine, which is from bench to bed, from lab bench to the bed in the clinic, and then feedback loop. So that's how we get better with coming up with novel therapies. But the thing is, when you have only AI algorithm for one aspect, in the early stage, that's not enough, right? And then the second point is, unless you have large enough data with high quality, otherwise it's garbage in, garbage out. The algorithm on its own without high quality data is actually almost meaningless. So that's why I think to a certain extent, healthcare is so complicated. It's already segmented. If you think about all the payer insurance, they have a whole bunch of data as well. Nobody is completely free to talk to each other. So I think that's maybe some of the reasons why it took so long for people to say, there's all these technologies, if only we can break down the walls and make them talk to each other. But life is not that straightforward.
Yep, great.
And to kind of build on that, in the biopharma industry, our foundation is a good understanding of life science. We take that understanding, adopt technologies, big data, utilization to improve healthcare. And we have technology companies like an Amazon or an Apple or a Google starting with good technologies and access to data and starting to move towards healthcare. And we will meet in the middle where using solid understanding of the life sciences with advanced technologies to advance healthcare. And we can collaborate. We very well may compete at some point as well, but the collaboration between those two entities, the technology focus and the life science focus, hopefully will improve healthcare for all.
Great. Mark, let me tag on to this issue because to me it's a fascinating one about, is there going to be a meeting in the middle or is there going to be a competition? There's been work that's been done recently at Harvard Business School by Karim Lakhani, who's kind of one of the leaders in the digital economy. And the latest thing that he's developed is what's called competing in an era of AI. And it suggests that there's more and more increasing returns to scale with data of all types of companies, that companies that own data are transcending industries. They're using that data and they're moving across category. And you see it in internet services where you have super apps like WeChat in China, which is able to offer multiple services, payments and commerce and entertainment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Karim Lakhani just wrote a brand new case on Moderna, the vaccine maker. And what was fascinating listening to this case is the way the case was positioned, and they had the CEO there to describe the company. They described the company as a technology company, not a pharmaceutical company. And the way the CEO to kind of describe the capabilities is this new kind of technology stack that captures data that can be used in a variety of ancillary areas. So let me ask you the question, is this kind of shaping up to be potential disruption of the pharmaceutical industry if you believe tech companies are there? Or, you know what, that all sounds well and good. This is a highly regulated area that requires deep expertise in an area, and the odds of a disruption occurring is not all that great. Gregg, let me start with you on that.
Well, Terry, that's a tough one, and I thought you were starting with Mark, so I'm a little disappointed. But no, that it's something that we think about a lot. I mean, we partner with many technology-based companies to facilitate the work that we have within the pharmaceutical industry. I would say many of those are, small tech, not big tech, and leveraging the innovation that they have and the models that they've built. Generally speaking, for data partnerships, and Stella mentioned this before, the data partnerships that we have and seek to answer questions that we have in common with players like healthcare providers and hospitals who are the holders of the data. We've had relatively less success in our interactions with big tech. Because of this question of what are their aims, what are their goals, and really their motivations generally, and each big tech company is looking at healthcare in a distinct way. They're not uniform. Data is at the core of each of them, and data is something that is a very sensitive topic, right? With pharma companies, with healthcare providers, et cetera. And so if you are trying to work with tech companies that have a thirst for data because they want to kind of do what they've done, replicate what they've done in other areas, it becomes a very difficult conversation. I would also say I would never rule out the possibility that tech companies will kind of make that leap and use their data platforms to somehow gain insight into kind of the very essence of drug development or the development of new drugs. I do think it's a much further leap than using their platforms, to drive insights into online advertising, right? Or kind of the email traffic. And so I think it's further away. And I think what you're going to see is, how much do they really want to take their businesses and grow them in the direction of gaining biological expertise versus how much life sciences firms take their expertise in biology and chemistry and start to grow out in tech. And so you may find that there's this meeting in the middle, but I think it will largely happen after each has shored up its capability in the other one's sphere before that happens.
Good, Mark, then let me, because I missed the opportunity to give you an even tougher question. So what does meeting in the middle really mean? If data is the new oil, and you've got players like Google. We just had David Feinberg speak, who's now the head of Google Health. He's a former CEO of UCLA Health. And just really, as you listen to him talk about how agile they are with data, predictive capabilities, et cetera. And maybe you could even put Amazon in the mix, even though they disbanded Haven, but they're known to be a vertical integrator. They're supply chain management oriented. They've done their AWS thing where they've taken something for their own purposes like data centers, made it available broadly. So they self-insure their own employees, figure out how do you do that better, and then blah, blah, blah. Tell me what meeting in the middle would mean. Is it really going to end up being you kind of share this great opportunity, or is it somebody's going to be a threat here and have a disproportionate advantage?
Yeah, I'll take that in a few different ways, Terry. In that I mentioned that as we move towards the middle, whatever that means, I think there'll be a lot of collaborations, a lot of partnerships involved. And Stella mentioned something that the human body is really complicated, and with a lot of redundant systems. If something doesn't work, the body finds a way to work around it. And if delivering important medicines, therapeutics was easy, you'd stick the algorithms into a computer and out would come a new medicine and it would treat the disease or fix the dysfunction, and away we go. And it's not that way, of course. I learned an interesting word in Japan, monozukuri. And monozukuri literally means making things. So it means manufacturing. But it also really means it brings in a spirit, a culture, a craftsmanship to making things. So it's not simply a production line. It's the know-how, the insight that goes along with it. And this is particularly important in healthcare because of, as Stella said, the redundancies that the human body builds in. It's not simple, you put in an algorithm, you end up with a medicine. There's a lot of know-how, of human know-how and insight into the life sciences components in order to bring forward important new medicines. This might be leadership, it's really expertise, it's how one really advances the craft of medicine. And that's what the biopharma industry has been doing for years and years, and now we can, of course, use technology to advance that even further. For a tech company to move towards life science, somewhere along the way, they have to develop that same monozukuri, the insight, the craftsmanship to deliver medicines. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be tougher coming from the tech side towards healthcare than the opportunity for healthcare companies to utilize technology and advance further towards important new medicines.
Excellent.
And if I could just add something there, Terry, because I do think it would be harder for them to build their biological capabilities. But as we look at the market caps of these companies, it wouldn't be all that difficult for them to buy a mid-size or even a larger biopharmaceutical company to try to gain that. And that's a possibility. I guess the question is that a better investment for them than just continuing to grow with what they know at their core in their tech platforms? So it is possible, but it's a major move for them to do something like that.
Yeah, let me add while on that, Greg, Google's acquisition that just closed of Fitbit. Is that a baby step towards some bigger thing, or don't overread the whole situation?
I actually think that Google has this view that data will inherently be valuable, and we'll figure out where it will be when we have it. And so I think that they make moves like that And their Verily division is making partnership, is entering into partnerships where pretty much what they want is the data out of it, and all parts of Google are acquiring data. But I don't know that there's a plan necessarily that Fitbit is going to add this to what we have, and then that's going to make all the difference. But they have this inherent view that the data will become valuable, and they will figure out, right? Because they're the ones that are the smartest, with data, that they will figure out, when they have all of this data, where to create the value and how to do that.
Excellent. Stella, let me ask you a different angle on this question, and that's the role of entrepreneurial ventures versus large companies. Because again, a lot of this kind of argument in competing in an era of AI is there's increasing returns to scale, that large technology companies have all this giant data set that can be predictive in nature, How do you see entrepreneurial ventures in life sciences kind of fitting in? Is it a more difficult play going forward, or no, there's so much there that a very verticalized focus can create lots of value?
I think I can borrow the words from Mark again. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. And in addition to the data, if you look at the biopharmaceutical, the relationship with big pharma and biotech, it's clear that the whole ecosystem of a biotech has supplied a vast majority part of the pipeline coming into the big multinational pharma companies by now, either through collaboration or eventually through acquisition. And I think with the convergence of our bioscience, chemical science with data science, I think it's similarly, we may see a lot of innovative IT or high-tech entrepreneurs coming up with new solutions, but they need to apply that new solutions to a biological problem. And they need the data from people who own the biological data or clinical data or chemistry data to test and validate to see whether that algorithm works or not. And that's why, the bigger the pharma company have data, they have chemical compounds, they have biological understanding, but they may not be as good as some of the entrepreneurs coming up with a new way of doing AI, machine learning, algorithm, and all that. And I think they need each other to be successful and to make an impact. And that's why collaboration has always been important for the pharma industry. I think pharma industry or biotech industry is the one where you cannot claim that there's a one person who single-handedly responsible to develop the one drug or diagnostic. It takes a village. And this is also not something that you can just make it successful in the garage of your home, because it takes a lot of lab bench work as well as clinical testing. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing to, going back to your previous question also, if you look at the big tech, there's a recent news of IBM for potentially selling their Watson, so the AI medical business. So clearly, they also spend billions of dollars acquiring smaller companies, whether it's for their data or for their algorithm, but they are still struggling with making that business or making that initiative work. So I think the future is bright, but it may take many baby steps and sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back for people to figure out not only the technology, but actually the business model or the collaboration model to work, because it's just so complicated.
And Stella, on that point, the investment profile over time, is it fair to say that kind of staying independent for a lot of these entrepreneurial ventures over an extended period of time is going to be more difficult, because at some point you need the scale? You may have, more talented entrepreneurs that figure things out better, but ultimately you're going to need that scale. And so the idea of building a business and you're going to need to exit a little bit quicker and sell to a bigger, is that fair to say, or no, you can run these things very independent, very, very long term?
I think it could go both ways. So, I think with the Roche world, Flatiron and Foundation Medicine, they all started with a collaboration with Roche. And then that evolved into an acquisition by Roche. But there are other players who are independent, and they are, from an investment world, we're seeing more and more smaller, claiming to be AI drug discoverer, drug developer, trying to use machine learning, different algorithms in different parts of a drug discovery and development value chain. And there are also many more players trying to figure out, disease management, pharmacy dispensing, and all the real world data. So I think at different parts of value chain, there are all kinds of small players who's trying to contribute their piece of center of excellence. And then somewhere there needs to be integration both vertically as well as horizontally to make it work.
Excellent.
Mark, by the way, this is what I got for buying Flatiron. If you can see it, that was my bonus for buying Flatiron. Terry, before we leave big tech, could I just mention that outside of pharma, I think big tech is going to have a profound impact on healthcare, and I think the company that's likely to do that most is Amazon, because I think their consumer-oriented platform and focus is very well suited for pharma distribution, right? Pharmaceutical distribution. Mm-hmm. I mean, in their acquisition of PillPack, now Amazon Pharmacy. So I do think probably if you look even forward beyond that, and I'm not privy to their strategy, but you can see them replicating that in areas like durable medical equipment and things like that. So I think that there will be disruption. And I think that disruption in healthcare will first occur in those areas, and then it remains to be seen how much of that and over what time period will migrate to.
Yeah, so Gregg, I always love the topic of Amazon with healthcare. So let me try the theory out on you that they actually have the best opportunity to upend healthcare as we know it today. So number one, at a base level, and we talked about it briefly, but the ability to do a supply chain and manage it so efficiently to get cost out, number one. Number two, the ability to access data and run a platform, matching patients and healthcare providers and understanding where the best fit is by expertise, by cost, by availability, et cetera, et cetera. And that ability with data to understand better care. Do you look at Amazon, and I know it's years away, but are they the ultimate threat or disruptor of healthcare as we know it?
I think Amazon is in a position where they could be the so-called ultimate threat to just about any industry they want to at this point. And I only say, I say that less than half joking. I mean, it's because of, yes, the data that they can accrue on a regular basis, on an ongoing basis, but also the platforms that they've built and how effective they are. In as you put it, the customer service distribution. Healthcare, pharmacy, specialty pharmacy, as I mentioned, durable medical equipment. These areas in healthcare are notoriously non-customer centric, and there's so much complexity there that if a company like Amazon comes in and creates, Prime Healthcare. There's almost nothing that they can't do in that commercial space. Where I wonder, where I kind of think it's more of a stretch, but potentially possible longer term, is now going into the drug discovery and development realm. So I look at Amazon as a company that's going to disrupt, and that we in pharma and biotech will need to definitely work with, right? Because I think they will end up being the main conduit for drugs into the marketplace, or a leading player. But I don't yet see them as all that interested in the drug discovery and development. I think other large tech companies might be more interested in that. Excellent.
Mark, let me ask you one, and then I want to go to the audience questions here, and it's the role of geography. So the idea that scale matters, that certain nations may have an advantage versus others. Let me ask you specifically with China, because we covered a lot at UCLA where we talk about how in many cases China has been leapfrogging the US in the use of data. They've been leapfrogging the US potentially in the area of 5G. They've been leapfrogging in areas of mobile payments, et cetera. Do you see that markets like China with large domestic population, the ability to access data that may be actually more streamlined than the US, the notable, technical talent that exists there, that all the things we've just been talking about for the last 45 minutes actually are going to happen more rapidly in China than they would even here? And if so, how and why do you see the difference?
Certainly, China will be a player in any place they choose to be. And Stella and I, in fact, were involved in some of the early activities of the life science growth, the pharma and biotech growth in China back now, 15, 20 years ago, Stella, when we were starting to do some of our work in China. And the pace that China has evolved in that time period has been amazing and will continue to be. From what we do, though, we look at the industry as not a China ecosystem or a San Francisco Bay Area ecosystem or Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's the world, it's the globe. And we work in global partnering, the global industry approaches where collaborations and activities to develop new R&D programs span the globe. So, for example, here we are, Chugai Pharmaceuticals, based in Tokyo, and we have partnerships with Gregg's former company, Eli Lilly, in the US, Gregg's current company, Roche, in Switzerland. We're working real hard to establish a partnership with Stella's company in Shanghai. So partnerships around the world, I believe, are the way that we will be able to harness, to utilize innovation on the life science and technology sides both. China has made tremendous strides there, as I mentioned. A lot of the comments we've made already pertain to any given country. And so, for example, I made a presentation once about big data and AI in China, and I said no place has more data than China. On the other hand, as Gregg mentioned, the quality of the data, the cleanliness or standardization of the data is also very important. And historically, from a medical practice standpoint, the quality or standard data structures in the China medical system were not as standard, so to speak, as one would want or one would need to utilize AI and other approaches on the data. But generation of new data, of course, given the 1.4 billion people in China, a lot of data is coming about. So we certainly expect to see lots of advancements from China, but at the same time, we view the industry as one ecosystem, and it's the world. It's the globe. Patients all over the world, as well as innovation from all over the world.
Excellent. Stella, any other thoughts on that topic about markets, China, US, elsewhere?
Yes, I think, as Mark and Gregg said, I think China, in terms of mobile payment and all these other things, they are in some ways leapfrog. Just for example, credit card never really took big shape in China because people jumped from cash to mobile payment directly, right? So I think in terms of a marketing channel, marketing and sales on the commercial side, a little bit like what Gregg said about big tech company, on the commercial side of things, China started from a different payment system and different distribution system, but now they have a chance to leverage the new technology, maybe make things different again. So that's something where they could actually make more progress, like the COVID-19. They were very effective tracking down everyone, make sure that it's contained if a suspected case is identified because of their mobile technology, but also because culture-wise, people are willing to give up their privacy in order to make sure that I'm safe and my neighbors are safe. But obviously in different worlds, this could be different. But on the R&D side, totally agree with Mark. I think it's innovation has no border. And at the end of the day, drug discovery, understanding biology, discover the best medicine is hard enough. I think we collaborate, the company in China collaborates with anyone in the world that makes sense and try to help to lower the risk and lower the cost.
Perfect. Let me start taking some questions from the audience. We've got quite a few. Gregg, the first one for you. Home flex care is a key focus area for Roche. However, device development has lengthy lead times. How can we balance speed to market with ideal drug delivery?
Well, I think that speedy drug development and in some cases device development, as you're talking about things like FlexCare, is always something that's very important. One avenue, oftentimes in the past, when you have a drug device combination, if you will, to treat patients, the drug gets studied first. You may even hit the market with the drug, and then historically the device has been a bit of an afterthought, or the digital tool that may enable FlexCare and flexible dosing, et cetera. I think what we in the industry need to do to speed this along is look at these more earlier as integrated solutions. And so how do we bring the right drug with the right delivery mechanism and the right tools in order to be able to dose effectively and choose patients effectively? How do we bring those through clinical trials together and get them into the market together so that we can kind of fulfill the promise of personalizing that care for the patient?
Yep. Good. Related question, and Mark, let me go to you about what is the role of the IT department in digitizing companies? When you're really trying to kind of create this data first culture, how do you do that when you're competing with larger data first companies that we've referenced here?
Yeah, that's a real challenge. And within Chugai, within our company, we have a program, Chugai Digital, that's embedded in the IT department. So the IT department has been given the responsibility of advancing utilization of digital approaches in R&D, in manufacturing and commercialization and such. And a challenge then, of course, is to bring in the expertise, the digital expertise, along with understanding of the life sciences industry. And kind of goes back to some of the previous discussions we had. But it's one of three key long-term growth focuses for the company: the digitalization of our processes, and key is getting talents, because there then we're competing with the tech companies for talent, but also needing the insight from the life sciences side. So it's a challenge, and in Chugai we put it into the IT group.
Okay, excellent. Stella, for you, you were talking about kind of fragmented access to data. One of the questions here is, how do you break down data silos as health systems are reticent to partner with pharma, who then sells the product with a healthcare system data back to the system? How do you break down all of these silos in essence?
That's a tough question. I think there are different ways of, for example, from health record and from other clinical applications. If you can de-identify people, right? So you provide a group of data that you can mine the data without knowing who actually has what and who used what medicine. I think those are some of the tacticals people are trying to use, and I think Gregg probably can talk more about that. But the question is, how much scale, how much data do you need? Is this, and I think that goes back to the segmentation of the healthcare providing system and paying system, because each hospital has their own system. And each payer has their system. Hospitals don't talk to hospitals. Payers don't talk to payers. So it's actually even beyond between tech companies, pharma companies, and providers and payers. So I think sooner or later, people need to realize that it is important to improve the healthcare and hopefully lower the GDP percentage of U.S. spending on healthcare and fund solutions. And I think it also needs to take a few successful examples for people to realize that, oh, once I break down the barrier, it actually helps my business, it helps your business. It's a little bit of pain to go through in the beginning, but once we have done that, maybe a new system that's more integratable would happen. And we do see also startups trying to work on these integration issues as well, trying to actually going forward, they could say that when you capture clinical data, it will make it easier to be integrated with different players in the healthcare system, rather than before it was very fragmented and different qualities and all that.
Good, good. Related question to you, Mark, and it looks like it's from one of your fellow classmates, Seth Walworth, class of 81.
Yep.
How much more, he's getting even with you here, I think. How much more usable healthcare data would there be if different electronic health records actually meshed with each other more easily? What standards bodies and governments, what can they do to fix this?
I'm going to punt that right over to Gregg because that's exactly what he works on.
I know, but Seth, I think, pointed at you, but we'll let you do the pass over to Gregg.
I don't want to get in between two classmates here.
Thank you, Seth.
But 1981 was a really long time ago, wasn't it, Mark?
So I'll let you respond later on that one, Mark.
No, look. It's somewhat related to the question, that Stella answered as well. So first of all, it's not even as much that the individual health records don't speak with one another. I think that getting kind of government involved with standards around the specific health records at this point probably. It's going to be difficult, right? And so I think one of the things that we need to kind of think about in this case is how much data do you really need, right? And I think some of the issues here are that we don't need to connect every health record with every other health record system. We don't need to connect every hospital with every other health system or other health hospital. We need enough. And enough varies depending on the question that you're trying to answer. And we need it to be clean. We need it to be usable. And so I actually think that there are technical issues associated with all this, and there are cultural issues, right? And cultural within the healthcare industry and with each individual hospital or health system. I actually think that devoting our time and attention toward the automated curation to remove this bottleneck of data that you can find within one system at first, automated de-identification and curation is probably going to yield more than the interoperability between individual EHR systems. And then what the direction we're headed, because in part because it's really difficult to get health systems and companies to share data with one another, to actually kind of physically transmit data to each other, is if you have well-curated data behind each one of their firewalls, there are techniques, tools, technologies that will increasingly allow for the analysis across those data sets without the data ever leaving the holder of the data. And so if you can envision this world where you can get curated data within many of the health systems, or the ability to curate it on demand for specific questions, and then the ability to interrogate that data across different locations without ever extracting it from that location, I think that may be the way the world looks in the future in terms of usage of data.
Excellent. Excellent. Let me ask you a final question for each of you, and then I like to do a wrap up of my observations and let you upgrade that. But let me ask each of you to fast forward 10 to 15 years from now and tell us what innovation might look like in pharma. How will our lives be different? What would we see practically out there? Stella, let me start with you.
Oh, forward-looking statements. Yeah, so I'm hoping that going forward, first of all, I would have a good understanding based on my own genetic makeup, what high-risk disease I may be exposed to. And then I know that from my provider or physicians, I know those are the areas I should watch out for, or those are the available treatments. So that's from me as an individual, right? And then I would be monitored with telemedicine and all that. And I would actually hopefully be helped to be diligent and compliant with taking my medicine, because 10 years I would be older and probably my health condition would need a little bit more care. But from a company perspective, I think going back again is trying to converge in, there would be, first of all, better diagnostic system, like early cancer screening, so that you identify patients with high risk and you follow them and you intervene as early as possible so that it does not blow up to be a big health issue. And once you are diagnosed with a certain disease, then there's a tailor-made drug, if not individualized drug, because that cost could be high, but at least tailored to the disease driver of your problem, and then with reasonable cost and good safety efficacy, then you get treated well, and then again you're followed up. There's always a disease management. So these days, for example, there's a vision that you hope cancer is no longer life-threatening. Cancer become a manageable chronic disease, and for certain cancer, that's happening with the new technologies. So obviously, hoping more will happen for disease like cancer, and I hope that we actually finally have good solutions for still unresolved diseases like Alzheimer's and all those.
Mm-hmm. Great. Mark, your thoughts on the same question?
So 10 years from now, Terry, we'll be sitting here saying, wow, we learned a lot from COVID-19, and we learned the importance of speed and delivery of vaccines, of therapeutics for a disease that suddenly appears. And the benefit of that is that we learned that the industry, through good science and good collaboration, cooperation with government and regulators and support, that we can move very, very fast. And that the public and patient expectation then is that we can respond very quickly to serious diseases and deliver important medicines. So we're living in a different world from a medical standpoint 10 years from now, based on the speed and success of advancing therapeutics, advancing innovation.
Excellent. Excellent. Greg?
Well, I really like what Stella said. Not that I don't like what Mark said, but I really like what Stella said at the outset about, as a patient, I'm going to know more about my genetic and my risk disposition, and I'm going to have tools to help me monitor that. And maybe I'll take that a step further. I actually believe that, maybe this is not the 10-year mark, maybe this trends toward 15. I think the lines between diagnostics and pharma and insights, if you will, technology-based insights will begin to crack and break down. And so what we're going to begin to see is, with more data on patients, we'll be able to identify not only risk factors, but be able to diagnose disease earlier, and even in some cases begin to predict disease. And the impact, on patients will be dramatic, right? Because that's, predicting earlier, even predicting or diagnosing early is going to have a dramatic effect on outcomes. But for pharma, we're going to need to integrate with those tools so we know how to study our medicines in populations that we don't typically do it, right? We typically study our medicines, largely in the most sick at first, because they're the ones that are most likely to have a response and differentiate from placebo. And then sometimes we migrate back in the treatment cycle. But we're going to need those lines to break down in pharma so that we can begin to explore what medicines work best in continuing prevention of disease, putting disease off, or really treating those very early onset patients, because we'll get to early diagnosis and prediction in that 10-year time horizon, I think.
Fascinating. So listen, let me do this. Let me share with you 7 takeaways that I got from the discussion. I want to give you an opportunity to upgrade anything I said, if I've missed anything, or any parting comments. So the first takeaway that I got is the value of the opportunity, the innovation opportunity, is massive here. And whether it's in screening, prediction, treatment, monitoring against cancer, a bunch of other things, these are huge opportunities to change outcomes. These aren't small use cases. These are big use cases. The second main concept that I came away with is this idea of personalization and integration, that the ability to personalize the treatment, the situation with the individual, a specific pharmaceutical, this idea of personalization and not mass approach creates a huge amount of value. And the integration of capabilities matters, as opposed to all the silos that you mentioned a minute ago. The third point that I took away is one of the key enablers of all the stuff we're talking about is data. It's the electronic health records. It's going to be from wearable devices, et cetera. And to Greg's point earlier, you still need clean data, but the growth of data and the availability has created a huge enabler. Fourth takeaway I got, and Stella, I think you've highlighted this, entrepreneurship matters. If we think this is just all for big companies and data is oil and the oil is owned by big companies, that's not true. You still have got to get talented minds solving really huge problems out there. Fifth point I took away, Mark, from you about global, that this, unlike a lot of other markets where we tend to see boundaries today between US and China and Europe and Latin America, this market is still fairly global and creates an opportunity for best practices in development, for markets, et cetera. The sixth point that I got is this idea of that partnering matters, and partnering, whether it's between tech companies and life sciences companies, whether it's between governments and businesses, whether it's between nations, that this idea of partnering matters probably even more in this sector than maybe other sectors that we think about. And the final takeaway that I've got, and I'll pose it as a question more than anything else, is this idea about tech versus pharma. And, whether, we fast forward, we end up kind of in the middle and there's partnering, or whether there ends up being some disruptions that occur, which we certainly have seen in a bunch of other sectors, that all of that is to be determined. And that's what makes this area so fascinating, is how the industry is going to evolve in the use of data and innovation. Let me stop with that. Anything I missed, any upgrades on those?
I think that was very good, Terry. Thank you very much for that summary. And certainly the emphasis as well on leadership, that it takes leadership to pull all this together and integrate parts around the world, across industries, within a company and disciplines. And that's particularly important as well. And UCLA, of course, and Anderson School can play a great role there. And next time we won't invite guys from Duke like Gregg, and instead focus on UCLA people. So.
At least do it when they're having a better basketball season.
I love it. Mark, well said. Leadership matters. And this is why people get an MBA and think about what they're trying to do in the future. Stella or Gregg, any other upgrades from you?
No, I think this is a great summary. I think it really takes visionary leaders who can actually not only think outside the box, because all these multi-technology, multi-industry sectors breaking down the traditional very heavy barrier and heavy regulated interest. It takes courage, takes creativity, innovation in thinking itself, but it also takes a lot of ability to execute and implement and translate that into reality. That's not easy. So yeah.
A key part of leadership, courage and creativity.
Yep.
Excellent. And Gregg, anything on your side?
Yeah, Terry, first of all, great summary. And I've really enjoyed this with the other panelists and the questions. Two things. There's never been a more exciting time to be in healthcare and in pharma, in large part because of this tech revolution, both on the tech side and the new modalities of treatment. And then something I think for all of us to consider, especially as leaders moving forward in healthcare, we didn't really touch on any of the ethical considerations here as well, right? Not only the ethics of dealing with people's very personal data, right, and making sure that that's safe, but envision a world, and I didn't include this in my future state of the world, where you can predict disease and then edit genes to avoid getting that disease. Well, when you get into things like that now, not just using the data for prediction and then treating in the more normal ways that we're used to, but using things like gene therapy, which have such potential to just change healthcare for the better, dealing with those ethical considerations will be an extremely important part of using technology going forward.
Very well said. And this is a fundamental issue in technology broadly with data, but so kind of personal when it gets into our own healthcare and well-being. So very, very well said. Listen, let me just thank the three of you. Mark, I want to start with you. You brought the panel together. I mean, you introduced us to two very talented colleagues of yours, Stella and Gregg. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for your insights from way across the pond being in Japan. And Gregg and Stella, thank you. Learned so much from you, coupled with Mark. A very expansive area, exciting, relevant to what the school does. And I hope we can have each of you back again very, very soon. Huge thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Terry.
Great.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.